Folks, coming to you from an undisclosed location somewhere deep in the heart of the Santa Monica Mountains, I am your intrepid host, L.A. Marzulli. It's a very special presentation, a wonderful interview, and I think you'll find this fascinating. So keep it right there. My guest today is Mondo de la Vega from the Jim Bakker Show. I've met Mondo. We've talked. I've been on his show, so we're doing a role reversal here. Now he comes on my show. He's got a new book, and I'm just going to let Mondo kind of take it. But first, a word from our sponsor. Folks, if you're trying to navigate market turbulence, why not set course to the Noble Gold Investments Safe Haven? With global uncertainty looming, your savings and retirement plans are under siege. But there's one asset that stood the test of time, and that, my friends, is gold. Unlock the peace of mind that comes with owning gold, the ultimate safe haven. And if precious metals are new to you, Noble Gold Investments will hold your hand through the whole process. They have a team of experts who will guide you every step of the way to safety. Thousands of investors have sheltered their retirement savings with Noble Gold Investments. Don't leave yourself exposed to the markets right now. It's way too risky. With gold at an all-time high and looking to climb even further, it's the perfect time to invest. Open a Noble Gold Investments IRA and secure your future with a free gold bullion coin. Act now before it's too late. 877-646-5347, 877-646-5347, or visit noblegoldinvestments.com. That's noblegoldinvestments.com, noblegoldinvestments.com. So, Mondo, thanks so much for coming on the record. And you're the second Mondo that I know. Mondo Gonzalez is the first Mondo. So, you're a Mondo number two, but today you're Mondo number one. And thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Oh, man. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you. We've talked many times, and I'm glad I'm not the only Mondo out there. Sometimes you text me, I'm thinking, wait a minute.
Yeah, wait, this is the wrong Mondo.
The other guy?
It's happened more than once, too.
Oh, but it's great. I love your friendship, and I appreciate everything that you have done to help us understand where we are in life. So many crazy mysteries, so many crazy things have happened, yet we can't forget the redemption power of the Holy Spirit in Christ to help us understand why we were chosen for this time and this season in life.
It amazes me when I haven't read the book yet, but I know about you, and you don't know my background, but there are two different paths, but they're all darkness. My path was New Age and gurus and psychedelics and everything else, and your path was that of a gangbanger. And yeah. I mean, if that's all you know, then that's all you know. If that's all around you, so tell us, your early upbringing. So you're growing up, and you have some choices, but you make the choices to follow the gangs. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. I think what happens in life, and the title of my book is titled "My Crazy Life and the Moments That Brought a Gangsters to Grades." I think that everything that has happened to me, or even my family, or anyone listening, watching right now, is that everything that we've gone through in life happened in moments. In one moment, life changes. In one moment, you go from having a family to, in 24 hours, wondering what happened. Right. And those moments reshape your thinking. They reshape the way you walk, the way you think, the way you carry yourself. And in that moment, it changes the very essence of who you and I were created to be. And you and I fell into the trap of deception because of the moments that led up all the way to making those decisions. And the moment that changed my life was one evening when my father, now you have to understand, when you read my book, you understand that my father was a very successful man, a man that was involved in agriculture. My father was considered one of the top shooters in Central America, wow. Was a very distinguished man. His family came from a politician background. My grandfather was involved in politics. Therefore, I felt like everything in my life was okay, was good. We were laughing together. We were eating together. And as families, in Central America, at least every evening around this time, 6 p.m., we will all gather and have dinner and around the matriarch, which was my grandmother, and yet I felt like everything was safe. Little did I know that my father was dealing with demons inside. He was dealing with a self-perception of himself, not understanding why he was frustrated. Yet he took it out on my mother. And one evening, it changed everything, LA, because my father never spoke to me in a loud voice. My father never put his hands on me, never even once lifted a finger to discipline me or my sister. So when that moment happened, it was a shock. My father was my hero. My father was everything to me. And all led up to that one moment that evening that my father beat my mother so bad that I thought that my mother was dying. And my father didn't see that my sister and I were watching from our room as we witnessed this man that was my hero, this man that was everything to me, all of a sudden transform into a different person and beat my mother with the same broom that she used that morning to sweep and clean the house.
Wow.
And that moment was a moment of shock, because in that moment, everything I felt about my father went from being happy and joyful, being my hero, to all of a sudden I wanted to figure out how to kill this man.
Wow.
And anger became part of who I was at that moment. The window of my soul was open to an emotion that I didn't understand. As I witnessed my hero beat my mother to death, and blood was everywhere. No one was around. My mother was screaming for help. My sister was begging my father to stop. Yet I couldn't do anything. I was paralyzed. Yet the emotion inside of me of hatred and anger overpowered my emotions to the moment that was the last day that I saw my father that changed my world forever.
Wow.
And from that moment, you'll read in my book that my mother had to flee from that scene. My mother, within hours, she had a window to escape, and we had to spend the next year fleeing from my father because he had connections with the military and the police and the politicians. Yet, for some reason, my father could not get a hold of my mother. It was a prophetic moment that happened, LA, because little did I know that God was in the midst of everything that was going on. And not until I wrote this book that I found out that my mother had received 3 prophetic words that became real. Yet I didn't understand what was happening. The only thing I understood was that this anger that I felt towards my father had to be manifested in a way that later in life I understood. Because when we came to America, my mother was born in LA, by the way.
Wow, okay.
And, you know, in the 80s, it was very difficult, just like it is right now, LA, that people are fleeing Central America and South America and heading to the border by the thousands, risking their life, risking their reputation, risking, you know, everything that you can imagine. Yet my mother said, we're going to do it the right way. I cannot afford to lose you guys. We have to do it the right way. But it was a price that very few people are willing to pay. And it took a whole year before we made the transition to California. But on our way to California, God began to speak to my mother through, this is bizarre because there was a very famous singer, a Christian singer, that happened to walk to my mother. We were in this resort, and this lady happened to walk towards my mother and deliver a prophetic word that God had already spoken to my mother 24 hours before.
Wow.
Yet she had no idea what we were going through. She had no idea what was happening in our lives. But by that time, LA, we arrived to California, and within probably 6 months, I was already involved in association with the gangs in Los Angeles, California. In the late 80s and early 90s, there was an explosion of gang membership like never before in America. America was used to seeing the mobsters that Chicago was providing. America was used to the mobsters that, you know, people like John Gotti and Bugsy and people like that. So America was used to some type of, you know, mob mentality and the mobsters in the streets. but they never, this is bizarre to me because they never expected an explosion of gang membership like it happened in the early 90s, of gang members that exploded into the scene from Los Angeles, California, from Central America, South America, and of course the Chicanos that were already living in Los Angeles, California, through the lowrider community, the bikers. All of that was a culmination of the explosion of gang membership that became one of the deadliest decades in America's history. Within a few months in the early 90s, there was such an explosion of gang membership that it overwhelmed LA County. It overwhelmed the LA Unified School District. It overwhelmed the communities that were once, made of Caucasian families, were made up African-American families. All of a sudden, it became an inflection of Hispanic Americans, Hispanics from other countries that overwhelmed the communities. But with that being said, I got trapped in that cycle, LA. I got trapped in that cycle because it was a breeding ground for young men like myself that immigrated into this country, and LA was waiting for me with a membership that changed my life forever. They harvested the pain that I felt when my father left that mark inside of me. They harvested the pain, they harvested the abandonment, they harvested into the very pain that I was dealing inside. Yet everyone knows, and this is one of the reasons why I wrote this book, I didn't want to write another gang member book. I didn't want to write another gangster story. There's a lot of great testimonies and stories about that, but I wanted to humanize the gang member, because we all have come in contact with a gang member, not realizing there's a broken little boy inside of them. There's a broken little girl inside that, behind the facade of that gang member. And yet all I was searching for, LA, was meaning in my life. I was searching for peace. I was searching for hope. Yet it was not existing in the streets of Los Angeles, California.
So how old were you? I mean, when you finally get to America, how old are you then?
Listen, this is quite bizarre because I was 8 years old when I arrived in America. By the time I was 10 years old, I was already identified as a gang member. By the time I was 11 years old, I was inducted into the gang membership, and not realizing that the gang that I got jumped into was one of the most notorious gangs in Los Angeles, California. Within hours, they stole my soul. There's a chapter in my book that I titled it, this is bizarre because it goes side by side with the baptism that Jesus talks about.
Right.
Yet there's a baptism of the soul that the street gives you, because when you get jumped in, you get jumped in as a little boy. But when they pick you up from the floor, being beat up and blood everywhere, and 3 or 4 guys have to jump you in, they steal your soul. They steal the very innocence of that little boy. And as a baptism of the soul is why I titled that chapter, because when I went in as a little boy that was filled with pain. And when I rose back up, I came up as a man filled with anger and rage and no emotion. It was the very thing that was going to make me that gang member that very few people understand today. But if anyone understands that if you go through pain and you get surrounded with people that will harvest that pain, you come out different. We began to play with Santeria. We began to play with drugs. We got involved in very demonic and heavy activity that as a little boy, I didn't understand, but it was preparing me to have a heart that had no emotions. In the streets, we called it, it's so crazy because they told us this: a warrior that has love and compassion is no good in the streets. You have to have no compassion. You have to have no soul. You have to have no heart towards another human being in order to be able to do what they ask you to do, which is get involved with drive-by shootings and get involved with fights and get involved to take over territories. And in order to be able to do that, you have to have no compassion and no heart. Yet I lost myself not understanding what was happening to me, not understanding that there was anxiety inside of me. There was pain, there was unforgiveness, yet I didn't know how to deal with those emotions. And I began to take those emotions out physically, getting involved with fighting, getting involved with our, activity that I wasn't prepared for. Yet by that time, LA, I had already seen so much in my life, because if you remember this, the Americas in the 1980s suffered one of the worst civil wars that Central America had ever seen at that time. And when my mother and my sister and I were fleeing from my father, we saw the war firsthand.
Wow.
And I remember seeing with my very own eyes at the age of 7, 8 years old, men being, shot to death right in the middle of the streets. The Civil War that took place in the Americas prepared me mentally, not realizing later in life that was the kind of thing that I will begin to witness in the streets of Los Angeles, California.
So you talk about Santeria, and I'm familiar with that, and that goes hand in hand with the drug cartels and the gangs. I mean, you basically are taking on as a protector a demon goddess, a demon god, whatever. So you're in the gang and you're trapped. I mean, for all practical purposes, this is your life, and so something happens, and through a series of circumstances, you come out of that. And this is, I mean, for people that don't know, I've read The Cross and the Switchblade years ago, and I've known gang members that have come to Christ, and I've heard stories, and I know about Santeria, but I've never lived that. I've never lived it, and it's got to be horrific, and you're trapped. There is no way out of this until you're old enough not to be a gang member anymore. What happened to you? What was the door that opened and got you
You're
out?
absolutely right. The demonic force that lives in the gang membership, in the gang world today, even back then in the late 80s and early 90s, all the way to where we are now, there's things that you do as a human being that you can only do when you're possessed with a spirit. A human being cannot do some of the most atrocious crimes that we're seeing and that we saw even back in the day. But I began to see in the back of the parking lot when I was a young kid and being initiated as a gang member, I see a group of women on the side and I see another group of men on the other side doing what they call Santeria and doing black magic and white magic, and drugs are involved, and so many rituals that begin to take place, because in order to function, you have to be possessed with something. You have to be driven with such a spiritual connotation inside of you in order to function, because you live on survival mode 24 hours a day. A human being cannot function in survival mode without a spirit being inside of them. There were days, LA, that I didn't go to sleep because I was afraid of death.
Wow.
I was afraid that I would die, not knowing, even understanding why I was even afraid. Yet I was afraid of hope that this can end one day. I was afraid that I can have peace. Yet my life was filled with survival mode 24 hours a day, because that was the life that we were living. I didn't know if I was going to make it back home when I left in the morning to go to school. I write about, in the first few chapters, I established the fact that death was around the corner. A bullet with my name on it was already written for me, because I had no plans for my life. The gangs told me, do not make plans past 18 years old because you won't survive to make it that far. Therefore, why would you make plans to have a family? Why would you make plans to even be somebody? They told me every single day, lock them up, throw the key away. The title of my book, I titled it My Crazy Life, because in the street culture, if you notice on the right side, there's 3 dots. Those 3 dots are known to be mi vida loca, my crazy life. In the gang culture, LA, this represents the unprivileged, the minorities. It tells you about, I know I'm not going to make it tomorrow, but I'm here today and I'm thankful for it. I know I may not be able to make it to the next day, but if I can make it just enough, then I'm going to be okay. The 3 dots were part of the ritual that is spiritual because it talks about 3 places that you're going to end up. 1, you can end up in prison. Number 2, you'll end up in the hospital real bad. Or number 3, you'll end up dead in the streets. The 3 dots represented the craziness that we were living in, not understanding the pain and the struggle and the rejection. Yet there was a group of people that found the common ground and became a gang family. It became an acceptance, and yet no one was willing to walk into our world and offer hope. No one was willing to walk into our world and present the gospel and let us know that there was a different life, because people were afraid. People were scared, because when the gangs took over a neighborhood, they terrorized the whole neighborhood. So people were afraid to do business. People were being extorted, people being drive-by shootings. People didn't, it wasn't safe in LA in the 90s. It was one of the most terrible moments for LA Unified School Districts. It was the worst time for LA County. It was one of the worst times for police officers, because no one understood the inflection of this gang explosion with young men willing to die. You know what our motto was? And I'm going to get to what your question is. Our motto was this: we live to die and we die to live for our barrio, for our neighborhood. How can you break that bond when you're willing to die for something? How can you break the demonic spirit when someone is willing to die for a deceptive connotation or statement that we felt trapped to? When a young man finds purpose, they find the will to live and die for. This is why the street culture is so strong. This is why the cartels are so bonded together. This is why there's an explosion of crime, because when someone finds purpose to live and die for, what good is it going to do you trying to feed the poor? What good is it going to do? Now, don't get me wrong, feeding the poor is a mandate from God, but we have to walk into people's world if we're going to see a change. My world changed when my sister walked into my life and she told me 3 of the most powerful statements that I heard at that time. And I write about it in my book. What if God is real? What if prayer works? What if you have a different destiny? That third one got me because I didn't realize that I may have the possibility to have a different destiny. Wow. I thought that my destiny was to end up in prison for the rest of my life, because that's what my homeboys told me. That's what the streets told me. The judge said, lock him up, throw the key away. Society was telling you that. The news were telling you that. Your family members were telling you that. So when you start believing what they're telling you, you don't have another destiny other than, I'm going to spend the rest of my destiny in prison. Or what about this one? They're going to remind you every single day that every time you step out of your house, you're dead. You better say your last goodbyes, because you may not make it back home. The police were against us. Your own family were against you. And when you yourself is against you, you lose hope. I was a dead man walking, LA. I was a dead man walking and wishing I would die every single day. I had the spirit of death. You talk about Santeria. There was such a spirit of death all around me, LA, that I couldn't shake the spirit of death. Yet I was afraid of finding hope. I was afraid of finding purpose. I was afraid of finding love. I was afraid of getting into a relationship. I never believed in having a marriage. I never believed in having a relationship. I never believed in having kids, and I protected myself. But yet when my sister walked into my world and said, what if God is real? What if prayer works? And what if you have a different destiny? That was a small moment in my life that opened the window to face the reality that I was facing within myself, because I knew I was dead. I knew that my number was up. I knew that there was a bullet with my name. And there were so many occasions that happened that I really thought that should have been me. Again, I write about it in my book. For example, I'll give you this story. I remember, and I write about this story in my book because it was so present to understand that God was there. And if you're watching me right now, and if you're going through a crisis in your life and you don't understand why you're still alive, God was in it. God is involved. This is what happened to me. I got in the lowrider. We're getting ready to go do a hit, is what we call them. You remember when we had the pagers? I was waiting for a page from the shot caller, one of the top captains in my gang, and I wanted that phone call because if I can deliver on that phone call, then it was going to move me up the ladder, because my goal was to be the shot caller for my gang. It was for me to become somebody. It was all about respect. It was all about honor. It was all about, gaining, popularity in your own circle. And when I received this page, we were driving in the lowrider, and I told my homeboys, stop the ramfla, man. Stop the car, homie. I say, I got to make this call. Now, you got to understand, I'm a teenager in the car full of grown men. And you don't tell grown men what to do, especially when they got pistols and they're known to be trigger man, meaning they will shoot and not even think about you twice. And I began to get in an argument. Finally, the guy in front of me said, give me the pager. I'm going to go make this call. And I said, hey, don't make that call, homie. I said, that's mine. I got to make this call. I was giving that order. He snatched the pager out of my hand in LA, and he made himself get out of the car and walk all the way up to the payphone. That's when we used to have payphones. You remember? He walked all the way to the payphone, and as he's walking, I'm hearing the music bumping, but yet something felt different in LA. Something didn't make any sense. And when I looked up, all I heard was gunshots. Pow, 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 pow. And all of a sudden, the guy that was driving, he peeled off. And all I can see was the guy at the payphone drop dead in the street. And my homeboy looked at me and said, that should have been you.
Right.
When the adrenaline stopped, I realized that should have been me. What happened? Death is all around me. Death was all around me. Death was chasing me. Death was just trying to perpetrate my mind and letting me know that I was no good, that I was a piece of garbage. Yet when my sister walked into my life and challenged me with those 3 words, it opened up the window for me to hear the gospel for the very first time. And my sister made me an offer that I couldn't refuse, LA.
I mean, that's as real as it gets. I mean, it's just, it's very sobering to hear your testimony and to hear what you went through. And I'm sure there are days when you get up and those memories jolt back, and you have to pray and, recenter yourself and thank the Lord that you're no longer there. Because
constantly, we go through PTSD moments, because somehow your brain feels like you're still back there, and I said this to people a lot of times. In the gangs, there were 2 types of people, LA. There were emotional people and there were intentional people. The guys that ended up in prison, the guys that ended up dead, the guys that ended up getting hurt were guys that were making moves out of emotions. I believe in mentorship. And the only reason why I'm still walking with God after 25 years is because the mentors in my life. But in the street culture, you also have the OGs, the mentors that help you navigate, especially when you're young and you're trying to make it through the next day. I had an OG that I believe God put in my life, because he will always tell me, don't make emotional decisions. You have to be intentional. You have to keep yourself out of prison. You have to keep yourself out of drugs. You have to keep yourself out of trouble. You got to make this gang grow. But in order to make this gang grow, you have to be intentional. If you get emotional, you're going to end up dead. If you make decisions based on your emotions, you're going to end up in prison. If you're going to make decisions based on intention, then you're going to have a future. Even back then, I was receiving this type of game, this type of wisdom that the street gives you. But when I came to Christ, I remember walking up to the church that my sister had offered me to go and listen to this preacher talk, because that which is so funny, LA, and I write about it again. I'm not trying to push my book, but I do want people to get this book, because I want people to know that there's hope, even for the hardest heart. that is out there. There is hope for everyone if you just have the courage to walk into someone's life and offer them hope. And that's what my sister did. She had the courage to walk into my life, a gang member with guns. Listen, I used to walk around with guns and sleep with my guns because I was panicked that I was going to die, that someone was after me. My gun, I thought, was my peace. My gun, I thought, was my strength. And when I walked up to that church, and I tell the whole story in the book of how all that developed, but when I walked up to that church, I walked in with my Lokes on, my bandana on, my Dickies on, my Nike Cortez on, and my 9mm on. And I said, if anybody recognizes me in this place, I'm shooting, because I cannot be seen in this church. If anybody finds out that I'm in this church, my reputation is gone. You have to understand, it was all about respect. It was all about honor. And if anybody catches you slipping into a church, your reputation is gone. Bye-bye, amigo. But I walked into that church because I made a promise to my sister that I would go. When I walked up there, there must have been about 500 people, and it was hot. I can smell the tamales. I can smell the pupusas. I can hear people speaking in Spanish. It was my raza, man. It was my people, man, you know? But yet there was something different about that room. I had never felt that presence in my life. I've been searching for. Yet in that room, I can see other gang members raising their hands, and I thought that my sister had set me up.
Wow.
On the other side of the building, I saw ex-gang members that were dressed in all suits, and I thought that my sister had set me up, and I couldn't find my sister anywhere, and I'm thinking, man, my own sister set me up. Yet the guy that began to preach was a former gang member that I knew from the streets. And he began to preach about this Jesus that I had never heard about. He began to explore the scenes of the Bible like I had never seen before. And this guy, as he preached, the louder he got, the closer I got to my gun. When he walked towards me, LA, he challenged me like I'd never been challenged before. For the very first time, I've been searching for peace since my father walked away from our lives. I have been searching for meaning. I have been searching for purpose. I have been searching to belong. I've been searching for someone to just love me because I didn't feel good enough to even be sitting at the table other than sitting at the table with pimps and hustlers and shot callers and drug dealers and cartel members and gangsters. Yet in this room, there was no judgment in this room.
Wow.
No one even cared that I was there. And for the first time since my father had walked away, a tear came down my eye. Wow. And another tear, and another tear. There was no fog machines. There was no lights. It was just an old, humble Hispanic church. And they were singing a song that I was not used to, LA. They were not singing Metallica. They were not singing NWA. They were not playing Ice Cube or Tupac or Snoop Dogg like I was used to listening in the streets. They were playing an old hymn. En la cruz, yo primero vi la luz. At the cross, where I first saw the light. When I heard those words, LA, my heart melted. My heart, everything that I've been holding on to, all the anger, all the anxiety, all the depression that I was dealing with, all the trying to figure out who I was because I created this image for people to fall in love in the streets. Yet I was this little boy that was wondering, why did my father not want me anymore? All of a sudden, I felt love like I've never felt in that moment. And the peace that I've been searching for, that Saturday night, LA, holding on to my 9mm, thought that I could be tough. When I heard that song and that preacher, everything dropped. And I dropped to my knees and I asked God to forgive me. Wow. I didn't know what I was doing in LA, but all I knew, it was the first time that I felt accepted for who I was. I felt accepted for everything, and I repented and I asked God to forgive me for feeling angry. I asked God to forgive me. What happened that moment in LA? I surrendered for the first time in my life.
You know, it's it's miraculous how he reaches down, and you know, it's also biblical. I mean, this is you and me. We're the type of guys, even though we're different, but you know, we're the type of guys he goes after. I mean, I was broken. I had nothing. I was alone. I mean, the whole deal. And I just asked him into my heart, and then everything changed. It wasn't nearly as dramatic because there was no one in the room, just me. But all I know is it'll be 44 years ago this June, everything changed, and here we are. We could go on, but I'm not going to do that because I want people to buy the book and read it for themselves. Mondo, tell us how to get the book, please.
Listen, you can go to Amazon.com and type in My Crazy Life by Mondo, The Moments That Brought a Gangster to Grace. You can find that book on Amazon. You can go to Walmart.com. You can go to Target.com. You can go to BarnesandNoble.com, any major outlet. But go to Amazon. That's where everybody shops. You can get the book there. You can pre-order the book right now. The book releases March 5th of this year. And even that, LA, is a miracle because 25 years ago, I got offered to do a book deal, and yet I wasn't ready to do it. God needed me to humble myself and trust him in order to tell the story. Because like I said, this is not a gang member story that is going to tell you just stories about the streets and the war that we went through. This is going to tell you the story of the human side of a gang member that encountered an unbelievable grace of God and how I surrendered my life to Jesus that brought me to a place to where I am today. So Amazon.com, you can get the rest of the story.
Mondo, thanks so much for coming on the record. I really appreciate it. Folks, there you go. Go to Amazon.com, My Crazy Life by Mondo de la Vega. When it gets released, hopefully we're going to get and carry it in our store here if we can. We'll see what happens for that. Thanks so much for watching. I'll be back again tomorrow with another episode of something, whether it's on the trail or UFO update or questions with LA. So if you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscription button. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.